Oh, something weird happened then. Yeah, whatever. Right, Matt, before we get into talking about the episode.
Okay.
Oh, something weird happened then. Or was that you rocking in your chair?
No, I think it might have been my end. It blinked off and on again,
Hmm.
but it might just be the connection. I think
Also,
my internet's okay at the moment. So
okay, all of this is going out on YouTube, so let's quickly move on. I'm going to
yeah.
tell you a funny story.
Oh, good.
Well, I say funny, it's not going to be funny.
Okay.
And I say a story, it's more of a fable, I would say. And given where I'm from, let's call this Worksop's fable. So, as you know, as I mentioned previously, I've been listening to, and this is what I always do when Doctor Who's on, I tend to listen to lots of Doctor Who podcasts with reviews, just for, and tends to be that I listen to them after we've recorded ours. So I listened to a lot of reviews of Once Upon Time after we'd recorded our review of Once Upon Time. And every single podcast mentioned that line about my our as yet unborn baby. All but two mentioned that line so that they could moan about Chris Chibnall and his exposition and the clunkiness of it. We mentioned it. I can't really remember what the context was, but we didn't mention it in quite that same context. And actually, before I get into the story, and I said this to you in a podcast that hasn't gone out yet, but that will go out later, I don't think it's. A lot of people have said it sounds exactly like the sort of thing that people would never say to one another. But to be honest, I think it sounds like exactly the kind of thing you'd say if you were talking into a dictaphone and you weren't exactly used to it and you were the only person in the room and you were trying to sound chatty but clever. I think it's exactly the kind of stupid thing that people would say in real life, but that television people don't say. And I think that's the difference. People are used to Russell T Davies, people are used to Stephen Moffat, and people are used to lots of other television writers too, who write characters who talk in television speak as opposed to real life. But the reason I've brought it up and the funny story that I'm about to tell is about that one other podcast that brought that line up. And I'm not going to say who the podcast was because this is not a point at the podcast and take the mick out of the podcasters. But I think this story is quite amusing and illustrates something. So all the other podcasts were moaning about the expositional nature of the line of dialogue and the fact that she also points to her belly at the same time, saying, well, one would have done, you didn't need both. And I'm thinking, yeah, but we know that Chris Chibnall likes to spell things out for the Sunday night crowd. But here's what happened on the other podcast. The two podcasters are talking about the episode, doing their hot take on the episode. And one of them says to the other, so what did you think about the fact that Belle's pregnant? And the other one says, is Belle pregnant? So, in other words, the line about the as yet unborn baby, the fact that she points to her stomach when she's saying the line about her as yet unborn baby, flew over the head of this podcaster who's a Doctor Who fan and a podcaster who's taking notes, who is being hyper aware of everything that's happening in the episode and still managed to miss this huge piece of exposition, which kind of underlines Chris Chibnall's reasons for doing things like that to make sure that the people who are watching the episode while they're eating their Sunday dinner or doing the ironing or whatever it is that they might be doing while they're watching, he's just making sure that everybody can keep up. And if the worst crime that he can make is having somebody say a line like my as yet unborn baby and by pointing at their stomach at the same time, I don't think that's really, really a criminal offence, to be perfectly honest. That was my funny story, Matt. I'm assuming you didn't find it as amusing as I did, but I found it
No,
quite amusing.
because I don't like the line that much. I don't think it's overly expositional. I just think it's a clunky way of expressing it, and I think there are probably better ways. And does it my as yet or our
Our
as yet?
as yet unborn baby,
Okay,
isn't it?
that's
Yeah,
slightly
she's talking to the father,
better.
isn't she?
Um,
Yeah.
I didn't actually hear it clearly when it first went out. I
No.
thought she said something about Azure.
Oh, yes. Oh, and then the
So
other thing is, we don't find out till afterwards that he can see her, that she's recording it on video as opposed to
yeah,
just audio. When the people were complaining about the line, She might well have just been recording an audio file.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
they're pointing at the stomach thing might have been irrelevant anyway.
I think my issue with the line was it could be all right, but I think you could sort of I felt like the actress was struggling to deliver it in a way that felt natural, because I think she was given a lot to do, which was record this, pretend you're talking to somebody elsewhere, record it for posterity, and everything else she did was great, but that one line felt out of sync with the rest of her performance.
She was doing a whole performance to a green screen with no other actors.
Yeah.
So yeah, she was. It's not surprising that she didn't get away with everything. Matt, happy Doctor Who Day.
Oh yeah. And happy Simon's anniversary.
Don't give away Simon's personal history to the listeners and the watchers.
It's on Facebook. He's just announced it on Facebook.
Yes, so, but his Facebook is set so that only his friends can see what he's saying.
Oh, well, an anniversary of something.
Okay, happy anniversary, Simon.
Yeah.
You are watching or listening to Strangers in Space, and for the next 60 minutes, we're going to be talking about Village of the Angels, so you don't have to. Hi, I'm JR.
Which order are we doing this in? Oh, hi,
I'll tell
I'm
you
Matt.
what, let's do it alphabetically.
Okay.
Shall we do that again?
Yeah,
I'm
let's
JR.
do that again.
I'm JR. I'm JR.
I'm Matt.
Okay, I think we flubbed it that time too, but I don't think there's anybody coming to us for the very first time here. And if they are, I'm sure they really don't care. Okay, so before we get into Village of the Angels, the viewing figures slightly down again. I think it's probably de rigueur at this point for the viewing figures to be slightly down each week. The reason I bring it up is not to talk about viewing figures and chart positions, which are also slightly down, and AI scores, which we haven't got in yet for this one, but mainly to say, I wonder if this story, this Flux story, which is getting an awful lot of love on my social media timelines, even from people who have really not enjoyed the Jodie Whittaker era so far, and there are now very few voices indeed that seem not to be enjoying what's happening. And despite the fact that a lot of television, and you'll know this from what was the Phoebe Waller-Bridge thing about the women spies, women agents? What's the name? Killing Eve. Killing Eve. That's a sort of mini-series, ongoing narrative. Things like Line of Duty are ongoing narratives across the series. So it's not like audiences aren't used to this. Maybe they're not quite used to this with Doctor Who, and so this is slightly different. I'm wondering if this will sort of go down as a Doctor Who series that was more for the fans than it is for the general public. And although the general public obviously aren't, utterly turned off by it in any way, I wonder if perhaps the fans will be the ones who enjoy this more. And as far as the general public's concerned, this might be considered ultimately a slightly weird thing that Doctor Who does. We'll talk later on in the episode maybe about what we might expect from Russell T Davies a tiny bit, because I think that conversation's starting to happen now, considering how this series is going. So that's a conversation for later. But the one last thing that I wanted to bring up before we go into actually talking about the episode ourselves, and Tom Spilsbury brought this up on Twitter. Tom Spilsbury used to be the editor of Doctor Who magazine. He, and I don't know how he accesses this, presumably it's somewhere on the website, the scores on Gallifrey Base. There is a way of totting them up so you can get an overall score, so you can see which episodes have done better than others. And over on Gallifrey Base, out of 26 Jodie Whittaker episodes, Once Upon Time is currently 19th of those 26, according to the votes that were, put out for it on Gallifrey Base, which I think is surprisingly low. And the Halloween Apocalypse is only 15th as well, so they're both in the bottom half. War of the Sontarans, however, that's 6th on the list. In fact, do you want me to do the top 5? Why not? Since he did it. Or people could go and find his tweet, I guess. Ascension of the Cybermen's 5th, Rosa's 4th, Haunting of Villa Diodati is 3rd, Fugitive of the Jadoon is now 2nd, because Village of the Angels, as the voting stood when Tom Spilsbury tweeted it out. Village of the Angels is, according to the citizens of Gallifrey Base, the best Jodie Whittaker episode that we have yet had.
Okay.
So I've got to ask you, Matt, what did you think of it?
Well, that makes me less inclined to like it.
Well, you
But
shouldn't.
I
You
really
shouldn't let
like.
other people
But I
make your
did.
mind up for you.
Unfortunately for that view, I did really like it. And I can see why they really like it, and I would struggle to understand why somebody didn't like it, even if it's not got the kind of the narrative like fireworks that the previous weeks had. It didn't have the complexity, but
Oh, I don't know. I think it sort of did.
it didn't have the complexity as Once Upon a Time.
Maybe, but
in
yeah.
terms of the kind of an Inception style going into people's past.
And it didn't have as much of the other storylines from Flux encroaching upon this one, but they certainly weren't absent. There was a bit, but perhaps slightly less, even than in the Sontaran episode.
Yeah. So as we predict, or as I predicted, as we predicted, it was a pretty bomb-proof concept, and they didn't flub it. So
no,
you know,
yeah,
that's my nutshell take.
All right, and my nutshell take is pretty much the same. I would hesitate to say it's the best of the Jodie Whittaker episodes, but certainly it's up there, and maybe it is. You know, hard to say really. You know, I really liked The Timeless Children and Fugitive of the Jadoon, but you know, on rewatch, those perhaps wouldn't be quite as spectacular. I have, despite the fact that it was only on 2 days ago, watched this one twice, as I've watched all the Flux episodes. And I've got to say, despite the fact that this works in an entirely different way the second time around, it still really works the second time around. And in fact, the second time around, you notice some of the clever things that are in there. When I say clever things, I just mean things that add up that you don't necessarily expect to. So, for example, the first time you watch it, the Miss Hawthorne, then Miss Hayward in the graveyard, you're kind of expecting her stuff to be kind of a Russell T Davies. Oh, here's a character who really shouldn't know about something, but who is able to spout off about it because in some manner or other they're psychic. No, of course, the reason she knows about it is because she was there both times when the same thing happened, right?
Yeah, but they conceal that, particularly for Doctor Who fans, because she's the Miss Hawthorne figure. I mean, in exactly the same place, saying exactly the same things as Hawthorne does to pretty much exactly the same person. So you just assume that she's somehow, and this is a story that has a psychic in it or a seer in it. So
well, yeah, but it doesn't really, does it? It sort of does, but again, that's another sort of red herring, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I kind of liked that. And one thing I really liked before we get into the actual episode itself, so off on a slight tangent, but the passenger. 2 weeks ago, they introduced the passenger, and we kind of said, well, there'll be a reason why the passenger's there, and we'll find out about it in the fullness of time. And then in the very next episode, we find out what the passenger is and why it's there. And we kind of probably expected that to be it. I kind of probably expected that to be it. I didn't think that necessarily would be the last time we see the passenger, but I didn't think we'd get any deeper an explanation for it. But then this week, we get to see how the passenger actually works. And that's something, you know, when they said there's hundreds of thousands of souls kept within this sort of vessel, I was kind of thinking, well, okay, we don't need to see how they got in there, but this week we do. And to me, that's kind of an analogy for how Flux has been working so far, because what I think is sort of happening is that Chris Chibnall's introducing something, and then in the next episode he'll develop it or explain it, and then in the next episode after that he'll explain it or develop it a bit further. And all of the is because often with this sort of mystery type things like this, it's very tempting, I suppose, for the writer to set a lot of stuff up and then leave all the explanations for the very end. But I think what I'm enjoying about Flux is that as a viewer, and as a Doctor Who viewer in particular, he sets lots of stuff up, but he keeps all of those things moving so that you're not waiting for things to happen involving those elements, but those things that are happening involving those elements are happening all the way through. So I know for you, Once Upon Time was one that worked slightly less well, and part of that was because of the explanations and the resolutions we got with Swarm and Azure. But from this week's episode, we can see, and obviously we said so at the time anyway, that those stories aren't done. There was just a part of that storyline that was resolved. But I kind of like the fact that he's resolving things as he goes, as new things open up. So this week, I think the emphasis has shifted away from Swarm and Azure and what they're doing, but more to the reason why they're doing what they're doing. And I think he's setting up now an explanation for what they're about rather than what they're doing, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think what's interesting me is the things that, like the passenger, that you don't realize are going to be mysteries. So they appear and they could come back or they might not. And then the next episode they do come back and then a little bit is revealed and you think that's it. And then it turns out to be a bigger thing, which does suggest that a retrospective review of Flux will be more important than an episode by episode review of Flux, ever more important, because we don't know the shape of the story even as we're watching the story. And it looks, initially it looked like the story was going to be a fairly obvious shape because it was going to be an apocalyptic story with two main villains and the Doctor trying to defeat them. But because this is Doctor Who, it's kind of operating backwards and forwards in time. And also it's tied in with this division stuff, and it's tied in with the individual stories that it's telling. And I wonder if that's actually a happy consequence of the fact. So Village of the Angels feels more than any other episode so far like you can see its DNA, I think.
Yeah, I was going to get into this. Yeah,
in a longer season. Like there's the Village storyline is clearly a really strong storyline, worthy of a two-parter, almost worthy of a good episode. And the division stuff looks like there are fragments of division stuff that were intended to be woven into maybe the 10 episodes should it have gone that far, and then the Flux stuff. But the happy accident is because it's being compressed, and because instead of a more spread out series of A, B, and C plot lines, you're getting it all in the episodes in a continuing story. That actually.
But having said that,
yeah, go on.
Well, having said that, the characters and where the characters are from and where the characters are going, and the angels and where the angels are from and where the angels are going, all the other stuff is so central to what's happening here that while I agree completely that Village of the Angels would have been an episode in a 10-episode season, I think it would have been a completely different episode to what we get. Yeah. So I think the DNA is there, and it would have been possibly something a bit like, and I think you basically alluded to this on Facebook or Twitter or somewhere, like yesterday or something. I think it would have been a bit like The Hungry Earth, where it's sort of a John Pertwee homage. But I think what's happened is that they've taken the sort of bare bones of a John Pertwee homage and changed it into something utterly, utterly different. So this is very much, well, it's sort of very much Stephen Moffat, but in a way, it's not even very Stephen Moffat, because the whole division stuff and all that stuff that's going on, that kind of, to me, reminds me of, I don't know, it reminds me, you're probably going to think this is a slightly weird reference, reminds me of the Crusades, time of King Richard and all that. Something that's going on, like religious orders batting up against each other in holy lands, and where the good guys aren't necessarily good guys, that kind of stuff. Are the division the good guys, or are they actually the bad guys? And we thought they were probably the good guys. Now they're being set up to be the bad guys. And they're taking the Weeping Angels and using the Weeping Angels. In fact, there's a line in dialogue that says they'll use anyone and anything from anywhere. So yeah, I get this big Crusades vibe. And I wonder also, given what Chris Chibnall's like and the way he likes to use things like Demons of the Punjab and Rosa and storylines like that, the Witchfinders, all those, all the historical storylines he's used so far have all been about whitewashing of history in one way or another. And again, the Crusades is one of those historical things that where we were brought up, and you're not of such a different generation from me, we were brought up to think of the Crusades as this great holy war that we should have won. You look at it now from this distance, and actually the Crusades is a story of us being the invading force, invading other people's lands. And actually, we're the villains in that storyline. I wonder if this whole division thing is going to be a big analogy for the Crusades or something like that. That was the vibe I was getting.
So, point one, when I was brought up, the Crusades definitely wasn't presented in a good way.
Fair
it was
enough.
definitely presented in a sort of these dark times. And actually, they didn't really teach it that much, I suspect, to avoid teaching it.
I'm probably thinking more about Sunday schools and things like that.
But also films and, Doctor Who and the Crusades. So it's not that long ago since then. What Division reminds me of most is actually the Stephen Moffat Silence, Good Man Goes to War, which is exactly the same, which is the Crusade. So you've got this kind of religious military organization that employs an alien we previously thought of as basically the next Weeping Angels that did something funky with reality. And then it turns out that they're agents of this organization. I mean, it is very similar to that.
Yeah, and of course, Stephen Moffat alludes to Watergate in that as well by using Nixon.
Yeah.
And Watergate is another example of, well, it's the government who turn out to be the bad guys, the government who is supposed to be the good guys. So again, that's another layer of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and the Time Lords as well. That's Doctor Who.
That's it,
They've been good guys, and suddenly they're bad guys. So
they always were kind of bad guys, weren't they? That's why the Doctor ran away in the first place, sort of.
Yeah.
They've hovered between the two.
Yeah,
that's kind of the point I'm making, is that it's a big grey area, something that we've always, something that if you look at it from the surface without really scratching the surface in a superficial way, something that looks really black and white is actually a big grey area. And that seems to me what this Division storyline is going to turn out to be. Obviously, we don't know yet because we're still only 2/3 of the way through. You did allude to the fact that it's a bit like the Demons. You talked about your book, of course, obviously. Presumably you have it within easy reach.
No, I put it, no. Oh, yeah.
That's shocking, Matt. Don't disappear off the screen at the same time as I'm going to.
Yes. It is, well, obviously. I mean,
take a drink now.
It's not shoehorning things in to suggest that this picks up elements of the Demons, to the point where if it wasn't written around the sort of time that season 8 was released on Blu-ray, I'd be surprised. Because the plot beats, there's a Neolithic burial chamber at the end. There's a village where they've been trapped. And I've listened to a few podcasts and they've all obviously picked up on this because it's so... I mean, the opening scene is a man wandering around a churchyard. To the point where I thought when what's his name, Gerald is calling out for Peggy, I just assumed that Peggy was his dog, because I just thought, well, that's exactly the opening of the Demons, and he's looking for his dog.
I think beyond that, though, for me, it didn't feel like the Demons because once the Angels come and you start getting all the Division stuff, and actually with Professor Jericho and his basement and stuff, I was getting much more of a Hyde vibe. And I know there's crossover, but yeah, I thought they left the Demons pretty much behind quite quickly.
Well, I thought they shifted from basically Quatermass and the Pit to the Stone Tape. So it brought Stone Tapeness into it, which, to be honest, might have made the Demons better.
Well, yeah.
I mean, put the Doctor into Jericho's position, doing proper scientific experimentation, then that would have worked in the Demons. But I think what it's replacing in the Demons is actually Miss Hawthorne, who takes a big leading role in the investigation and in the warnings and in the solutions of how to get around the Master's black magic traps. So I think that's what Jericho is kind of substituting for.
And of course, there is a sort of energy barrier as well here. So I suppose there are lots of elements. I just think the sort of central premise of the story ends up being something completely different. So I think obviously the demons comparison is there, but I think becomes increasingly superficial as you go through the episode. And I wonder if that's another of the results of this going from being a 10 episode series into a 6 episode Flux. So something that should have been more like the demons ends up resembling it only in a sort of surfacey way, I think.
It's kind of condensed milk version of the demons. So that, but actually, I think taking nostalgia out, I think this is probably better than the demons. I think this is a more successful story than the demons. The imagery is more successful, and it's less cliched. They go to more interesting places, even though it does do a big Nigel Neal kind of pastiche throughout. And I think there's still clunky moments, clunky dialogue. I didn't care at all with this because the clunky dialogue is delivered in a weird basement with angels at the window trying to get in whilst they're fiddling with old technology to try and keep them at bay. And if that's happening, then I don't care if the dialogue could be anything. It would be fine.
There were some terrific moments. And I tell you what, speaking of the visuals, the pencil angel that comes to life, and then when she lights the paper on fire, the angel made of fire, some fantastic visuals. I've got to say, if I was 8, I think this probably would have been one of, if not the most terrifying episode of Doctor Who ever. Frankly,
I think this does feel like certainly out of the last. So I think it might be my favourite Jodie Whittaker so far, but it's I don't think it's the highest quality. I think it's the most comfortable I've been watching it because I'm aware from the very beginning that they can't mess this up. This is just going to be consistently like this, so I can relax and just enjoy it. I think this is going to be one of the ones from the 3 years that kids will remember as being their first because it is so frightening. And that is the Weeping. I mean, it is just the Weeping Angels. I watched half of it for a second time, and actually, I was unnerved by the Weeping Angels. There's the Scarecrow bit where it's coming across the fields. That's a genuinely unnerving sight.
And the edge of the village where you get to see, out into space, and the special effects are up to having bits of the earth crumbling away. So the area that they're standing in is gradually shrinking, which I don't suppose for 1 minute is a deliberate metaphor for their sort of, ice fields at the North and South Pole. But, it reminded me of that at a point, and it reminded me of the rising sea levels. So islands are shrinking in the Pacific and what have you. It reminded me as well of that. I don't suppose for a minute that was deliberate, but these are all things that a writer and the people directing and producing and making the special effects, these are probably all things that people have in the back of their minds subconsciously and might be bringing to it. So yeah, it reminded me of a lot of stuff.
It felt a bit like a sort of a traditional, almost like a Bob Baker, Dave Martin script.
Yes.
R.I.P. In that it felt like somebody had written a load of cool things down. Angel on fire, crumbling edge of a village crumbling, an extra graveyard, a scarecrow that's an extra gravestone, a scarecrow that's not a scarecrow. And they'd written it all down as a series of wish lists, and then they'd attempted to weave it into a story, and they'd been very successful in weaving it into a story. And what's more, the story they wove it into was filmable. So sometimes there's a lot of places it can fall down between the wish list and the result. And I think Bob Baker and Dave Martin often made things that weren't entirely realizable on screen, whereas this didn't feel like it fell apart at all.
There were like some tiny things that felt slightly as if you could tell that they were just special effects, but I don't think anything was so egregious that you got taken out of it at all, not even close. I'll say one thing about the writing of it, and I hope I'm not doing her a massive disservice, and I I could very well be wrong, and who knows, in the fullness of time, we might find out. It did feel to me as if Maxine Alderton, because when we found out that Maxine Alderton was going to be writing for Series 13, it was on her professional profile on the internet, and it said that she was, I can't remember the way they put it. The way it was put a different way, but basically it would said was going to be writing for Series 13. Now that came out, I think, before the broadcast of Series 12. So it was a fair time before COVID that came out. Now, it's perfectly plausible that she was completely involved with the rewriting of this script afterwards. But this felt so compatible with and so consistent with the episodes we've had so far. I do wonder if it's possible that Chris Chibnall just took what Maxine Alderton had written to that point and rewrote it himself. Because it feels like Chris Chibnall to me, because it feels like the last 3 episodes we've had. I could be doing her a massive disservice, and who knows, I probably am.
It's difficult because that game of trying to take a script and unravel it, particularly with this series, I think it's going to be even harder because it's obviously been rewritten at some point. I think as I was saying, this felt like a script that had been written over a long period of time, very carefully crafted and very successfully retrofitted into the full 6-part story in a way that actually possibly, well, it's difficult to say if it improved it from a script you can't see, but it was certainly very successful. For me, it felt as atmospheric as The Haunting of Villa Diodati, so I felt that I could see Maxine Alderton's fingertips on this script. And actually, for me, it was almost tempting to think that the village bits were Alderton and the rest was Chibnall, but I think that's probably wrong. I think it's more closely interwoven than that. Professor Jericho is a very individual character. Professor Jericho is an unusual character in Doctor Who, in that he's almost like a sort of brigadierish character. He's a completely positive British human male from the 1960s.
Well, maybe from 1963 in particular. Have you seen the publicity photo that BBC have put out for the next episode?
Well, he goes back, and so he's in the next episode then, I guess.
He's in the next episode and in the publicity photo, and this could be a massive deliberate red herring. In the publicity photo, he's basically opening a fob watch.
Okay. I mean, I'd be disappointed if it turns out.
Wow.
He's a Time Lord in disguise.
Or
I quite like the idea. I quite like the idea they've just introduced, because I think they did a similar thing with Hyde. I mean, this has got connections with Hyde. You're right, but the Douglas, what's his name? The actor?
No, it's
the one that wasn't Wolverine.
I was going to say it's not Douglas. It's Doug Ray Scott.
So he was quite a positive character, and that felt unusual at the time. That you got, because I think modern Who scientists tend to be kind of along the lines of kind of Oppenheimer scientists of doing anything without thinking about the results, whereas there are a few scientists in modern Doctor Who that are scientists just for the sake of exploration or investigation, and I think Jericho is one of those kind of admirable scientists. So and really well played as well, Kevin McNally.
I mean, great. I love him.
I mean, from the beginning, you know what that character is. You didn't need the Belson line of dialogue. I thought that was probably telling us one too many things. He was doing enough with his performance.
I think it goes back to what I was saying though at the start about sometimes, and I think maybe if this is the big criticism that you can make of Chris Chibnall, that he hammers points home sometimes. But then I think the reason he's doing that is because Doctor Who is on a Sunday night. And I think it is still going out. The live audience, is still 80% of the overall audience, something like that. And the live audience is still largely comprised of people who I suspect aren't necessarily the kind of people who'd be inclined to watch Doctor Who. So I think that's the reason for that. Kevin McNally, when he was in Doctor Who originally, The Twin Dilemma, he had just been in something else, and I can't for the life of me think what it was. And I haven't got a browser open at the moment, so I'm not going to faff about looking it up. He had been absolutely brilliant in something, and when I learned he was going to be in Doctor Who, I was beyond excited that this wonderful actor was going to be in Doctor Who. And then, of course, it turned out to be The Twin Dilemma, and it was terrible. If Jericho turns out to be a chameleon-arched early Doctor, a pre-Hartnell Doctor, another one of the sort of fugitive Doctors, which is, I guess, the sort of supposition that a lot of people are making online, especially in the wake of this photograph, I'd be happy. And I think also if that happened, and of course this is conjecture about something that's a long way from confirmed, that would be Chris Chibnall doing a white middle-aged male Doctor as one of the fugitive Doctors. So I think maybe that would balance out some of the woke criticisms that he gets as well. So that would be an interesting choice for him to make if that turned out to be the case too. I'm not sure whether I think it's likely to happen. I suspect if the BBC are putting out a picture like this, they're probably putting it out as a red herring rather than as a clue. But it's certainly possible it's a clue.
Yeah, and but also he was in Survivors. So is that what you're thinking of?
No. He'd been the lead in a series. Something
Oh,
like
really?
Yeah, something like, and I can't remember what it was.
Diana?
Maybe might be.
An Andrew Davis adaptation of R.F. Delderfield.
I think it probably was then because I would have seen that. Yeah.
The fob watch, the time might just be an unsubtle reference to the fact that he's just been taken back in time, and he's now living in the early 20th century. If he turns out to be a hidden Time Lord, I'd be disappointed in the context of the episode Village of the Angels, but I'd be happy in the context of future episodes if he continues to be in it for a bit longer and they gave him more to do.
He's confirmed, I believe, on IMDb to be in both of the subsequent episodes.
Excellent. Well, that's
so
good.
Yeah. So I mean, I can't say whether that's true or not because, of course, IMDb could have been edited by somebody who doesn't know. But
I do think that. So going back to the Belson line, I think yes, there is a case that Chibnall needs to hammer home exposition for the live viewer. But this wasn't exposition. This is character building. This is a sort of a throwaway character building line, and I think that's different. That you can kind of deliver that in different ways or leave it out. It stood out to me. It was one of the only things that sort of stood out for me when I was watching it. But as I said before, I didn't really care because it was delivered by Kevin McNally in a basement with angels burning up.
yeah.
And the angel coming on the EEG machine or the lie detector, which was a lie detector then turned into an EEG machine. But I didn't care about that either.
No, there are a couple of other things that I think people have pointed out that I really don't care about too. The fact that it's split between two time zones when presumably the angels only really needed to come and do their extraction once.
I'm pretty sure that there was the doctor found something on the wall, which was a floor plan of the house, which had secret. And I didn't get this far in my rewatch. Did it actually have secret passageway written on the plan?
Oh, I'm not sure. I don't know whether it did or not.
I seem to remember seeing it and reading.
It said something, yeah.
Secret passageway on it, and then she bashed through. If I was Jericho and I'd had that plan, the first thing I would have done was bash through the walls to find out where this passageway went. But again, that's fine. That's all right.
Also, well, yeah, but it's not entirely unrealistic that if you're really interested in a certain thing, that other things that are peripheral to that thing might escape your attention. So, I think that's hand waveable, frankly. But yeah, there were 2 or 3 things like that in the episode, which were a bit head scratching if you stop to think about it too much. But when you're enjoying it that much, do you really want to stop and think about it? And does it really matter? And who knows? Some things, like the fact that there are 2 extractions in 1901 and 1967, might end up getting explained. And if it doesn't, it made for a really impressive last 20 minutes of the episode. So who cares?
but also that's the joy of the Weeping Angels, is the less they explain, the better they are. But then they do reveal things about them, but the things they reveal open up more mysteries about them. So they're a really enigmatic villain, more so than the Daleks, who have kind of been explored up, down. The Doctor's even been inside a Dalek. With the Weeping Angels, they're still an enigmatic, mysterious alien, because they do something completely abstract to what they don't exterminate, they don't delete, they don't kill, they just shift, or they don't necessarily kill, they kind of shift people and then feed on this energy. And that's a really weird thing to think about.
What did you think of the fact that it turned into a storyline about an extraction, and that the Weeping Angels are working for the division?
Oh,
I just thought that was really interesting in the wake of the latest Suicide Squad movie.
Okay, yeah.
Because to me, that was like a perfect mirror. The Suicide Squad is made up of all the baddies, and they're on an extraction mission, basically. And here we are, the Angels are doing an extraction mission in Doctor Who, and they're the bad guys. So, I mean, I'm not saying it's a perfect parallel between the two things. I just thought it was an interesting coincidence that Doctor Who is doing this in a very different way, obviously.
I think the idea of a rogue angel was interesting, and the Doctor had the same reaction I had, which was, wow, a rogue angel, that's interesting. The partnering or the positioning of the Angels in Division, that says to me more about Division than it says about the Angels.
Yes.
So
yes,
it actually improves. So the more we find out about Division, we know that the dog monsters are in it, the dog creatures are in it, which made it feel a bit fluffy and nice, or some of the dog monsters.
Yeah.
But now we know that they use the Weeping Angels as a kind of commando unit, and that kind of elevates Division up slightly higher. So it's more kind of cosmic, more kind of, I don't know, outside of time. And also the stuff that the Angels do, their powers, their kind of modus operandi, work so perfectly as a kind of a commando unit going into time and kind of cauterizing it. It's almost like if Division were responsible for the Time Reapers from Father's Day, but the Angels are much more evocative. They're much better done. They're much more frightening, less monstery. So yeah, it's good.
It makes me really excited for the way this is going to all end. And if it ends slightly disappointingly, in the way that, say, Pyramids of Mars or Talons of Weng Chiang ends slightly disappointingly, I don't think that really takes away from what came before. But I'm starting to get really excited about, well, the Angels are obviously this is not the end of the Angels in this storyline, obviously, and by some distance, because it looks even more. I said last week that I thought the Angels were going to be involved in the way it resolves. Well, I didn't realize that the Angels are going to be massively involved in the whole reason for this storyline existing in the first place, I suppose. I mean, it's difficult to tell at the moment quite how these things are going to work out, and if the Angels are just working for the division. But it sounds like not only is there rogue angel, and I loved the sort of politics of the way that played out, with the rogue angel deciding to give up the Doctor instead, or they're, trading, that sort of whole trade-off thing. I thought that was brilliant. And again, reminded me of, I don't know, American politics in the 70s or something along those lines. But yeah, the idea that all this might come around to a story about the division and what the division is makes me excited, because these are things I thought might get addressed, but I don't think they'd get addressed as heavily as this.
So yeah, it felt in early episodes that it was telling the story of Flux. So Flux was one storyline. Division was potentially another storyline, although we hadn't got there yet. And then there were little individual stories being told, which we assumed aliens would be one. Angels would be one. Sontarans would be another.
Yeah.
and so on. It does feel from this like, so Flux didn't appear much in this episode, which is why I think Flux is done. I think Flux has happened. We're dealing with the aftermath of the Flux.
Although, on that, just one note, I think we might, no, I think we will find out how the Flux came about. So I think the Flux will be back in episode 6, only in a hint, here's the explanation type of a sense.
Well, I certainly think Azure and Swarm obviously will be key elements in next week's, clearly, and the week after.
Yeah.
I was quite happy that they weren't in it that much, because they weren't my favorite bit. They were one of the bits in Once Upon Time that I didn't like, particularly Swarm. Azure I prefer to Swarm. I just thought Swarm, I just can't get on board with his performance.
Everybody loves him.
I don't mind the design. It's what the actor's doing within the design.
Yes, the actor. I keep reading people saying how wonderful he is. And I'm not quite, I'm in between, I think. I don't think he's that wonderful, but I don't think he's a problem.
I mean, if they do something amazing and dramatic with him, which I hope that they will, that's fine. But that is one other reason why this story. So with this story, the Bell strand felt like a breather from the Angels strand. I wasn't particularly invested in what was happening on this sort of quarter of a planet or third of a planet.
I really enjoyed that.
I didn't mind it.
I really enjoyed it.
I kind of wanted to get back to the Angels, but actually it was good to sort of build up tension. So there were mini cliffhangers, obviously. So this was like a 4-part story, broken up with a trip to what Bell is doing. And actually, yeah, I kind of liked the Azure kind of going around sucking up the leftover people from Swarm. So that's interesting. It felt like it kept it ticking along. But then Once Upon Time felt like it was keeping their story ticking along. So it still doesn't feel like, it still feels like we're seeing the edges of what they're doing. And I'm hoping that we actually like get a proper exploration of what they're doing, who they are, and they become a proper menace in the next few episodes.
I think they're pretty menacing now. They're mopping up the survivors of the Flux in order to easily destroy them, it seems like. Or maybe not necessarily destroy them. Maybe they have another plan, but they've already destroyed 2 of the passenger vessels. And in each, they said there were hundreds of thousands in each, and that by destroying 2, that would have topped 1 million. So that's, and although we don't really get to see it because we just see this one figure dissipate into dust or whatever it is, so we don't really get an impression of it. But that is quite a big thing.
It is, but the Flux has already killed half the universe or whatever. So it's sort of, I don't know. I don't think we've seen the most of Azure and Flux since the first episode, and maybe that is on purpose. If this was a standard 10-part season, they'd disappear for X number of episodes, maybe reappear a bit in the middle, and then they'd have a climax at the end. So possibly they're that version. They're the monsters, and they were more. He was more threatening in that opening episode. It's only Once Upon Time that I felt underwhelmed by what they were doing and this whole sort of plan. But that didn't. Again, if Flux, the story, does finish weekly, I still don't think it would damage Village of the Angels. I think you could still pull this episode out and watch it individually in future as a kind of a good example of Chibnall's era of Doctor Who. We're now getting a not a huge but a good collection of episodes that you could point at and say, this is what Chibnall's Doctor Who can do. This is what his era is like. This is the strength of his era.
There was a rumor going around earlier in the week, and I suspect this is people just speculating out of nothing, frankly, but somebody came up and said it at some point, and it just had the whiff of bullshit to me. But they said Chris Chibnall had gone to the BBC and said, I want to do a woman doctor, And the BBC said to him, "You can do a woman doctor as long as your first series is entirely standalone episodes with no arc at all, so that we can resell Doctor Who,
Okay.
to a brand new audience, completely afresh." And I don't know. That just doesn't feel like it has the whiff of any kind of truth about it to me. But I suppose it's not impossible. And that this is the kind of Doctor Who that he wanted to write all along, but just wasn't allowed to at first.
It feels rubbish, partly because it doesn't feel like the sort of dictation the BBC would normally give, because that's a creative decision, and they would want. They hired Chibnall, who's known for his ongoing storylines, and also ongoing storylines. Even this was sort of 4 years ago, 3, 4 years ago, 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Even then, ongoing storylines were the things that were being successful. They were the things that were growing.
Like I say,
things like things out of order anymore.
Things like Death in Paradise and Midsummer Murders are equally, if not more so, as popular, and they're entirely standalone. And yeah, I think the idea, but I think it was his idea, or at least it doesn't feel like anybody said to him, "This is what you have to do." It feels to me like it was his idea to start at the Death in Paradise / Midsummer Murders end and work his way across to doing Line of Duty or Stranger Things or whatever. It feels like a deliberate choice, moving across the 3 series to do 3 different series. The first one is very different from the way, say, Stephen Moffat would do it. The second one has the arc going through in the way that Stephen Moffat would do it. The third one, and we know that the third one was supposed to be the same as the middle one, 10 episodes with an arc going through and some standalones in the middle. But even though it's obviously been considerably rewritten and he's leaned into the idea of making it all one story, I suspect it might have had more of an arc than the middle one did, because the middle one really wasn't so much an arc as just characters linking those episodes together.
But also that first season is not entirely, you couldn't show it in any order. So the first 2 episodes you have to show one after the other, which means the third episode you have to show after that. There's the episode with Graham's wife, which obviously has a particular place. The final 2 episodes you have to show really in those places. So you've got the option of mixing around maybe 3 episodes and shuffling them around.
I think the idea is not so much that you can watch them out of order, but that you can watch them without having seen the week before or needing to see the week after.
Yeah.
And again, that's not entirely true because of what happens with the characters.
Yeah.
That was the rumor that was going around. And again, I think that's rubbish. But I thought it was worth bringing that up as a kind of illustration of where he's gone instead. So as you were saying, you can see what the Chris Chibnall Doctor Who is now. I think you could see it in series 11. I think this just highlights it.
I mean, the Russell T Davies diary, or his emails to Ben Cook, is such a good book, and I really hope that we get some sort of, not a Stephen Moffat penned version necessarily, but some sort of study of Stephen Moffat, like an proper Andrew Pixley level kind of day-by-day analysis of what happens through the Stephen Moffat years. But I think Chris Chibnall's time would be even more interesting, because there's a level of not secrecy, but Chris Chibnall is definitely less high profile than either Russell T Davies or Stephen Moffat. He's definitely more behind the scenes. So to know how these things have worked, what the negotiations were, what his writing process was with other people, and how this series was originally conceived, how it's been shifted, that would be such an interesting thing to read. And hopefully we will at some point get that. Somebody at Doctor Who magazine will write a kind of an archive version for these stories.
You would hope so.
Yeah.
Right, changing the subject slightly. One thing that we've not even mentioned yet, but that is massive, absolutely massive, at the end of the episode, and this feeds into the thing about Kevin McNally maybe being the Doctor next week. The Doctor turns into a weeping angel, gets turned into a weeping angel.
Yeah.
And that I don't know if that's going to get resolved next week or unsolved next week. She comes back to being a human Doctor again next week, or maybe that will go on to the week after. One of the reasons why there was a rumor about Kevin McNally is people saying, well, somebody has to fill the Doctor's hole next week, as it were. Yeah, that's a bad way of putting it. Fill the hole in the narrative that the Doctor would ordinarily fit.
That's better.
Yes. So, so somebody next week has to take on the mantle of doing and being what the Doctor would do and be. And so, if there was another Time Lord, especially if it was another older Doctor from, you know, the pre-Hartnell fugitive era of the Doctor, then that would be, you know, that would take up the mantle there. But yeah, the Doctor's been turned into a weeping angel. I don't know if it's the best a cliffhanger has ever been executed in Doctor Who. I think there are ones where I think, oh wow, the execution of that cliffhanger is amazing. But in terms of what the cliffhanger is, the Doctor gets turned into a weeping angel. I don't think there's ever been anything more dramatic.
I mean, the concept.
Yeah,
the concept is brilliant. And sat here, I couldn't imagine that they're not going to have the Doctor in the next episode because Jodie Whittaker's so central to these, the sort of feel of these episodes. But there's nothing to stop them having portions of the episode set in Jodie Whittaker's mind, in the Doctor's mind.
Yes.
And continuing this whole sort of whatever this lung barrow thing is going on, interacting with this angel that's taken her over. And getting the information, because there's a lot of information that she still needs to get. So that could be a way you get the actual B plot, which is the companions, Jericho trying to survive in 1901. You obviously get UNIT operating presumably in the present day.
Could be UNIT, could be that UNIT's wiped out. Last time we heard about UNIT, they'd been disbanded. So it could just be that Kate Stewart has a part in the episode.
Yeah.
That's not to do with UNIT, but just to do with their relationship with the Doctor.
So that feels to me like the present day. So
yeah,
my view is this takes place in 3 places: 1901, somehow communicating with the present day, and UNIT trying to work out how to get these people back or how to contend with this.
Maybe, yeah.
And the Doctor in this mindscape where she's having the PowerPoint presentation potentially to demonstrate what the division is and what's going on.
Again, that's so very Stephen Moffat.
Yeah, it's a Neil Gaiman thing, so it's kind of got the potential of being the Cyberman Neil Gaiman thing. Again, depending on how they do it, it's not a bad way of getting there's a vast amount of information potentially that Chris Chibnall has to deliver to do with the division and what's going on. And so if that happens with the Doctor being shown things, I'd be fine with that.
Here's a little bit of supposition for you. The Doctor gets turned into an angel at the end of this because she's being recalled to division. What if the Doctor, at some point during the course of her association with the division, was a weeping angel in another incarnation? And I tell you the reason I bring that up. At the start of episode 2, she gets that vision, the black and white vision of the house. I wonder if the mindscape that she'll go into will be the house, in which case the only way she could have had that vision of the house at the start of episode 2, before all the events here take place, would be if at some point she'd already been, and in some ways still had the essence of, hidden deep inside her, an angel. So I wonder if the Doctor has been an angel at some point. That's my supposition.
Or had some sort of symbiotic relationship with an angel. I think that's a way of kind of, could be either. I like that. I mean, if it took place in the house, if the house was like the staging post for these revelations, then that would have a bit of a heaven sent feel to it potentially, as well. And I wouldn't put it, Doctor Who's got to the stage where it can cherry pick from its more successful predecessors, and Heaven Sent was a very evocative, very successful, very memorable episode. So to give Jodie Whittaker her little version of Heaven Sent would be quite welcome, I think.
I can definitely see it happening. I can definitely see the potential of it. Do you want to give this one a score before we talk about a couple of other things? Because I've got a couple of other things I want to bring up, but they're more general rather than specific to this episode.
I think I'm going to give it a 10.
Oh wow.
I think that's the first time with the Jodie Whittaker story, maybe Fugitive of the Jadoon, but it's one that I did want to watch a second time, and I can see myself going back to it because not because of the kind of the mythology or the deep mythology, but because of the performances and Kevin McNally, and because of the atmosphere, and because there was humor in this one as well. There were jokes, there was wit, and there was lightness. So I had a really good time watching it. And any criticism I have will either be mitigated after the 6 episodes, is to do with how it fits within the 6 episodes, or it's stuff that I don't really care about because it just adds to the texture of the episode.
And for me, it's a 9 because all of that, but with the slight caveat that I do find still this era of Doctor Who just has that slight distancing factor for me, something to do with the production or the direction of it that just keeps me slightly at bay from it. So I'm just not quite as engaged with it as I wish I was, and as I have been with other showrunners. But it's only by a fine line. And yeah, this was great. Now, a few other things before we move on. One thing I want to bring up is a sort of correction for something I said last week. I think it was me that said it. I'm pretty sure it was when we were talking about who the 4 people, because last week the Doctor went back into her old timeline when she was the fugitive Doctor, and we saw the original capture of Swarm and Azure, and we saw that there were 4 of them, and we were trying to work out who those 4 were. And I said one of them would be Vinder, and another one was the one that was a mystery. Well, of course, it was pointed out on Twitter afterwards that those other 2 actually is not Vinder and somebody else, but it would be Gat and Lee from Fugitive of the Jadoon. So it's the other characters from Fugitive of the Jadoon. And in fact, people went on to say, I'm not sure if it was in reply to me or just in general comments, that they were talking about the same thing elsewhere. It might be that that was written to be Gat and Lee, and it might be that it was written for there to be more for Joe Martin to do. But of course, COVID.
Okay.
So it could be that episode, a lot of what happened in that episode, including stuff where Yaz is standing in for somebody else, could be that episode was one that was very heavily rewritten or written to take account of the COVID restrictions, and so therefore a lot of that was affected in that way. Another thing that I kind of wanted to mention, because I did mention it before and something struck me about it, at the start of the Halloween apocalypse, we get the pre-credit thing, and then we get the opening titles. And the immediate thing, if I remember rightly, that we go into after the opening titles is the tunnels, the Liverpool tunnels.
Right.
That this Williamson guy is making. And we keep seeing him. We keep bumping into him in one place after another, but always in tunnels. And I suggested that somehow those tunnels were going to be connected either in time and space or whatever with the planet time or something, whatever. But the thing that occurred to me this week is that those tunnels were the first thing we saw after the opening titles on the very first episode. And they're the first thing that we see that's kind of part of this story, although it turns out that Carvanista is going to be part of this story from the pre-titles. But those tunnels are effectively the opening of this story. Well, and it's story writing 101 that you open with the thing that's going to be your resolution. So more so than ever, I'm convinced that the whole Williamson thing, the whole tunnel thing, is going to be to do with how the story is resolved in some way.
Sure. I mean, how far back are Yaz and Dan? Are they 1901?
1901. The tunnels are 1820, so there's still a ways to go.
A bit far off that.
Having said that, those tunnels have existed for 201 years, and you could set a story in those tunnels in any one of those 201 years, couldn't you?
Yeah, but I think you'd need Joseph
Williamson
present to
presumably
make that. I think he'll be back. I think the tunnel's less important than him as a character. Well, not in plot terms, but in terms of presentation. I think if you get the tunnels, you'll get him as well at the same time.
Well, this is the thing. He's been turning up in all sorts of places.
Yeah.
I wonder if those tunnels are sort of like a wormhole. And the
Mhm.
reason he's turning up in other places is because he's been caught up in this wormhole. I wonder if he could turn up in 1901 or something, or 1904 by the time we get to next week, isn't it? Because they say they've
Yeah.
been there 3 years. I wonder if that's going to somehow be part of it. Right, here's another thing that somebody pointed out.
Okay.
Bel, Bel, is Sumerian Aramaic for master.
Oh. Okay.
Bel and Binder are about to have a time child. Could
Right.
Bel and Binder be the master's parents? Could they be the doctor's parents? I don't really subscribe to any of these rumors, but they're all over the place on Twitter and wherever else at the moment. The sort of
I
Bel
mean,
and Binder.
we still don't know exactly what race they are. They're not. We don't think that they're Gallifreyan, I assume,
Not necessarily, no, I don't
because
think
of the
so.
way that Vinder recognizes the TARDIS, but he recognizes it from another race.
Yeah,
So
from
he
having
knows
heard
of
about it rather
they're
than
aware of
used.
the
Yeah.
they're aware of Time Lords, but they aren't Time Lords. The child wasn't conceived, as they handily told us. One of the things my brother was concerned about in Once Upon Time was when was the baby conceived, because there didn't seem
Yeah,
to
yeah.
be that much time. But Bell handily gave us all the exact date of the conception, which was probably too much information.
Oh, by the
But
way,
yeah,
yeah. Oh, I was just going to say, by the way, very quickly, people were saying, well, how long has Vinder been in that Rose thing, the space station,
yeah,
if he's on his 1500th report or whatever? But
yeah,
I mean, given the way he was sent there and the reason he was sent there for, my understanding of it is that he's sending a report every 10 minutes to spam the people who send him there. So yeah,
yeah.
that's why he's
Who
up to
knows?
X number of thousand or whatever it is. Not
Yeah,
because he's been there for 1,500 days or whatever, but
no,
because he's spamming them by sending reports all the time because he's got nothing else to do.
yeah. I mean, you feel like he's been there for a while, probably, but
Couple of months at most, I think.
yeah, I think they're going to have. Well, they're going to have to balance that with either that or they extend the gestation period for whatever race Bell and
Well,
Binder
yeah,
are.
yeah.
They're like, maybe they're like elephants and they just like take years.
Well, that's
Um,
true. Yeah.
so I don't. Yeah, I don't. I think everybody sees the master somewhere.
Well,
So
and it's like we didn't have any Barbara Flynn this week, but is she going to be the Rani? Is another one that was brought up. I don't think that fits.
also, yeah, it's either Rani or Susan every time there's a mysterious woman, female character. I think Joseph Williamson is definitely, obviously going to be back.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
the Tecteon or whoever she is, she's obviously going to be back, unless they've got 2 episodes, but potentially 3 episodes. So Chibnall could be seeding things for those last 3. Joseph Williams won't be the thing that they seed for the last 3 because I don't think that's powerful enough a story for.
No, I've got a suspicion that this story will be pretty much wrapped up. I think the 3 specials, especially given certain things I've heard about them, probably will stand apart, or at least the first 2 will. So I think all of this stuff is going to be wrapped up at the end of Flux. And after all, it's called Flux, and it's supposed to be a self-contained. The idea of calling it Flux is that it's a sort of self-contained thing. And although it refers back to things that happened before, I don't. I think it'll pretty much be wrapped up. I think it pretty much has to be.
Yeah.
And another one of the reasons why I think that is because he's introducing all this stuff and he has to resolve all of these characters. He has to resolve the journeys that all these characters are taking. So even a character like Orsock or whatever she was called, the Barbara Flynn character, she's been introduced. I think she has to have some resolution within the Flux storyline. And the 2 episodes that come immediately after, from what I've heard about them, it doesn't sound like there's any way they could be connected. So I suppose there may be further revelations, but I think we're going to have a resolution to the revelations that we've had so far.
Okay.
Could be wrong, obviously could be wrong, but I don't know. That's just the impression I get. But on that subject, I'm going to float something past you. Again, I've done it, haven't I? I'm going to float a theory past you. Not necessarily a theory, again, more of a sort of conjecture.
Okay.
Chris Chibnall wrote Series 12, and at the end of Series 12 was this massive, massive revelation that didn't really affect the Doctor, but was a revelation about something that we didn't know about the Doctor. And in a way, instead of affecting the Doctor, kind of reinforced the Doctor. But I don't think you can end an effectively standalone series of stories with a revelation like that and then do an interconnected, single narrative series and not have a revelation at the end of that single narrative story that feels like an anticlimax after the one that came before. So I think whatever Chris Chibnall does this year, in some ways, he's duty bound to outperform the revelation that he had at the end of The Timeless Children. So I think there has to be, at the end of this series, another revelation about where the Doctor came from. And I don't think that's necessarily anything to do with the Division. I've said all along that I think the Timeless Child and the Division are two separate storylines, unless he chooses to bring them together. And I don't think he's bringing them together because they're the same storyline. I think it's coincidence. But I do think he's also setting up something for the Timeless Child. So for where the Doctor comes from. I'm not sure, I didn't say the other day that if there are, the Barbara Flynn character says something about this universe is going to die, with the implication that other universes existed before and others will exist after. And I said it's possible that the Doctor could be a character who exists in all these universes, and instead of it being parallel Doctors, it's the same Doctor who gets essentially flown into one universe, the new universe from the dying universe, and that's hence the wormhole and the Timeless Child. I wonder, and I'm not predicting this as something I expect to happen, but we know how Doctor Who in the past few years has leaned into time paradoxes, grandfather paradoxes, and the like. I'm wondering if there could be a storyline about the Doctor, the fugitive Doctor, the Joe Martin Doctor, being sent back into the past, even her past, to stop the flux from happening. But because she regenerates, loses her memory, whatever, she becomes caught up in events and she becomes the cause of the flux. And so the Doctor is not just the cause of the flux, but the resolution of the flux. But in being so, the Doctor is also the cause of and the resolution to the Timeless Child. So effectively, the Doctor becomes the Doctor's own parent. And I use the word parent loosely because I don't mean actual parent, but essentially the Doctor becomes this self-contained circular grandfather paradox that's wholly tied to the idea of the flux. The flux and the Doctor are both the cause and the resolution of one another, and neither exists outside of the other. And I guess what I'm saying is, if it's the Joe Martin Doctor that you send back to do and be that thing, then you can have the Joe Martin Doctor regenerate, I suppose, into the William Hartnell Doctor, and so begins our universe and our understanding of who the Doctor is, and the pre-William Hartnell Doctor becomes sort of sealed off in its own sort of circularity. Do you understand what I was saying? Because I don't think I've explained it especially well, but I think I just about did it.
Vaguely. I wonder how they would manage to relay this in a,
well, maybe the same way I just did,
episode,
basically. But
one thing
60 again for episode 6, by the way. It's another 60-minute episode.
So my view is Division and Timeless Children, I agree, are separate. I think Division is the way for the Doctor to understand more about the Timeless Children. I think the Timeless Children will bleed into the last 3 episodes, so I don't think the Timeless Children is going to be the conclusion to the Flux story. I think there's going to be more investigation of it in bits and pieces, maybe in that final episode, maybe in the 3 episodes. I found out, do we know a bit about them? Because one of them's set in the past, isn't it? Historical.
Oh,
I've seen like rumors of it, or is that just spoilers?
No, that's spoilers, I think.
Okay.
Maybe we'll do 2 minutes of spoilers right
Yeah.
at the end of the episode.
What my thought process is, Flux has happened, the universe is decimated, or more than decimated, it's destroyed.
Yeah.
So at the end of this story, in the next 2 episodes, that's going to have to be reversed.
Yes.
To reverse that would mean time going backwards, which they've done before, which is fine, or an Inferno-like revelation that they're actually in, that this universe has come to its end, and that there's a parallel universe that they can all flip to.
And actually,
Yeah.
we have also had that before in the modern series, in The Big Bang. Stephen Moffat did it.
Yeah. So that's a good way of resetting things to start to pave the way for RTD. My concern about so what I think they have to do is make this universe, uncomfortably, this universe, the Doctor Who universe. Partly because when Jodie Whittaker was cast as the Doctor, a small percentage of fans said this has to be a parallel universe that will get fixed later on. So if this Doctor turns out to be an alt universe Doctor, that would be kind of playing into their hands and be really.
But you mitigate that if you fix that 3 episodes before she finishes, so she spends 3 episodes not being an alt universe Doctor.
Yes, yeah. But I think certainly there's going to be an alt universe, and there's going to be there's going to be a sort of a bittersweet mourning for the loss of this universe they've just left, or they've just witnessed destroyed. And that's about as far how that works with the Timeless Children. I think your idea is possible. I think it would be a very, very knotty piece of exposition to try and get that across.
But then, we know he does that. So,
yeah,
I'm trying to build with the building bricks I've got.
Yeah.
But that's kind of, I'm not saying I expect that to be the case, but I'm saying the last couple of weeks have given me the suggestion, oh, maybe this is where he's going. And, I don't like to, we all like to speculate, but I don't like to second guess that I could be right in my speculation. That's the fun of speculating, that you could be a million miles away. And generally, I prefer to be wrong and to have something better or different instead. And generally speaking, it has tended to be something better and different. And that's a great thing. Okay, before we talk about spoilers for the last 3 episodes, we'll wrap it up now. But I just wanted to say, having watched this and having seen how this works, and given what I said at the start, I think this leans a bit more into, it's kind of not intense. Intense is not the word. It's kind of a bit over involved. And so I think it leans more towards Doctor Who fans than the general public. But seeing how it works and how involving it is, how engaging it is to do a 6-episode narrative as a series, I wonder if Russell T Davies, and we know of late that he's been doing entirely, not always 6, but 6-episode narratives, like It's a Sin and Years was 5, I think. And the one with Hugh Grant was 3. And prior to that, you had Cucumber and Banana, which each were 8. He's doing self-contained single story narratives. I wonder if Russell T Davies will do that. I wonder if the idea with Russell T Davies is that the BBC would like to go back to having a series a year. I still stand by my idea that Russell T Davies will do the first and then take a more overseeing role as other people come in under him to do the others. I wonder if Doctor Who will change into something where you have a season a year that has one single self-contained narrative story across it, of maybe 6 episodes. Depends how many they can get out. If they go annual, I'd say 6, plus a Christmas special and maybe a spring special, so you get the best of both worlds. If you get 2 specials, then that means every year you get 2 standalone self-contained stories plus 1 story set across a series across 6 or 7 episodes, I don't know, in the autumn or whatever. So I'm just saying, and again, I'm not saying I predict this to be the case, but I'm throwing the idea out there that I think this is a possibility. Russell T Davies will do maybe 1, but maybe 2 specials a year and a self-contained series.
So in terms of workload, that's doable. I don't think so. Initially, I thought if Russell T Davies was going to write all 10 episodes of a series, I think it's different from his other series. So Years and Years, It's a Sin, I think were not easier to write, but possibly
it's one
easier to
set of
write.
characters. Yeah.
One set of characters. You don't have to write the Doctor's dialogue. You don't have to come up with fantasy ideas, and you don't have to worry too much about CGI budgets and squeezing as much as possible into the budget. But I think 10 episodes, 6 episodes is a possibility. My only issue with that is it would have to work like these 6 episodes, because Doctor Who is about different places and different stories. So you'd have to have this kind of balance between one continuous story, but the little mini stories happening, the Angels, 60s, the Sontarans, the Crimean. Otherwise, you've just got a Victorian set 6-episode story.
But look at the series that he did with David Tennant and the Christopher Eccleston one. If the Christopher Eccleston one had been Rose, followed by The Long Game, Rose followed by The End of the World, followed by The Long Game, followed by Boomtown, followed by Bad Wolf and Parting of the Ways, that would essentially have been a 6-episode self-contained story with a sort of single narrative thread running through it. It wouldn't have taken an awful lot of rewriting of those episodes to turn those 6 episodes into something approximating Flux. And in the second series, you've got Tooth and Claw and the Cyberman 2-parter in the middle and the Dalek and Cyberman 2-parter at the end.
Yeah.
Again, if you add Father's Day into that mix, again, it's a sort of self-contained. So I'm not suggesting that he's done it already, but I'm suggesting that Russell T Davies already knows how to do it in Doctor Who and still get that variety of storytelling.
Yeah, I think it's definitely possible. And we've seen that from Flux. I think it's a limitation, though, because you're trying to think of an overall story that could also be told in a universe-wide scale and in Earth's history. That's the limitation, that you could probably do sort of 5 or 6 of these things in different combinations. But as we've seen with Russell T Davies, you can destroy the world, you can move the world, you can blow up the universe, threaten time and reality. But at some point, you're going to run out of apocalyptic ideas. You're going to run out of these sort of...
Yeah. But this comes back to what I'm saying about, I think Russell T Davies will do the first.
Yeah.
And then he'll oversee somebody else doing the second. And maybe, like Killing Eve that we mentioned earlier, another person will do the third. And another person again will do the fourth. And that's the way you keep it fresh and keep the ideas about how to do it coming in, and keep the ideas about what the resolution each of those times could be coming in, so that you don't repeat yourself. So I don't know. I'm not saying I necessarily expect it to happen, but I just think it's more of a possibility now.
I can certainly see them dropping to 6 episodes guaranteed a year.
Yeah.
That's something that, because I haven't felt yet. I mean, we haven't got to the end of it yet, but with Doctor Who being shown at this time, with the knowledge that there's a seasonal special on its way, and then another special after that, I don't feel like I'm lacking Doctor Who. I felt like maybe in the long gap between seasons, that's when you feel like you lack Doctor Who. But given sort of 6 sort of 50-minute episodes, that feels like a good concentration of Doctor Who. And if that happened every year, then that would be a good rolling sort of regular. It seems to be what people, certainly fans, are kind of moaning or complaining about, is the lack of regularity of Doctor Who. And then others are complaining about the lack of the reduced number of hours of Doctor Who, inherited fear from the 1980s, when they kind of increased the number of episodes but reduced the length of them. But yeah, 6 episodes a year with a few specials, that seems doable. Better for the actors. You would get more interest, well, not more interesting actors, but you could have your pick of actors, because to do 6 50-minute episodes is something that Hugh Grant would do, Michael Sheen would do. You know, you could have companions drawn from anywhere for that.
Well, and plus, like with Flux, you could have peripheral characters who are in for the entire story.
Yeah.
Which is not something we've really seen before either. Right. Oh, let's call it a night. And I'll just say this one thing. This is the spoiler bit now.
Okay.
And this is what may or may not be coming up in the next 3 episodes. So for anybody who doesn't want to know what's coming up in any of the specials, here are the things that have been mentioned. The Daleks are going to be in one. People think that's going to be in the New Year special this year, but actually the filming for that seems to have been in the very last of the specials. So that could be in the Regeneration one. One thing that is known is the one that's in the middle is going to take place in China, in history, and has a Chinese director. I wonder, we all thought that was going to be an Easter special. I wonder if that might actually go out in February at Chinese New Year.
Okay.
But yeah, so if one of them's a Dalek story and one of them's a Chinese historical story, I'm not sure that necessarily indicates that we're going to find out more about the Doctor.
Well, the time is you could have anything.
Oh no, I suppose not. I suppose I don't mean find out more about the Doctor, but I suppose I mean continue the themes or whatever of the Flux storyline.
Oh no,
that's why. Yeah, I think that's why
the Flux storyline is dead in 2 episodes. I think the Vision storyline calms down in 2 episodes. I think Vinda Bell leave. I think Dan Yaz stay. I think Timeless Children sticks around for a bit.
Right, that's 2 more things. Prediction. Right, these are really heavy spoilers. Graham and presumably Ryan are going to be back to say goodbye to the Doctor. Whether they'll have a major part or just in a couple of scenes, they're going to be in the last episode. And David Tennant's also been seen in Cardiff.
Okay.
Clean shaven instead of with a beard, which presumably means he's going to turn up in the last episode too, in some way or shape or form.
Okay. Good.
And on that note, we'll leave it until we do this again next week. I was JR. I
was Matt.
And we'll speak again soon.
There we go.
What have I done there?
I don't know. But we managed to talk for longer than the actual episode went on. Okay.